What you are looking at is an aircraft carrier, or at least the 21st century equivalent of an aircraft carrier. Because Ukraine just conducted the most daring attack on Russia since the Kursk offensive, and maybe this one even tops that one. Take a look at this map. These are the places that Ukraine struck. In fact, I'm having a hard time showing them because of the curvature of the Earth. Regardless, though, they are nowhere near Ukraine. Everything in Russia is now in danger. At least this time, the targets were Tu-95 and Tu-22M3 strategic bombers. They are notable because they have been used during the war to drop bombs on Ukraine. Oh, and in other uses not yet from this war, they can also deliver nuclear weapons. We will talk more about that in a bit. For now, today's general overview is to discuss what actually happened, Russia's new vulnerability that has become apparent to everyone, the potential for Russia to retaliate with nuclear weapons, what you may hear about a rift between Ukraine and the Trump administration, and what this does for the upcoming negotiations. About what happened, we can go straight to the source. Today, a brilliant operation was carried out on enemy territory, targeting only military objectives, specifically used to strike Ukraine. Russia suffered significant losses, entirely justified and deserved, according to Zelensky. The preparation took over a year and a half, something to think about if you are anticipating that these things happen overnight. Planning, organization, every detail was perfectly executed. It can be said with confidence that this was an absolutely unique operation. What Zelensky is not saying here is that Ukraine smuggled shipping containers into Russia, and I use the word smuggled here very loosely, because they may have just used a shell company to get them through a normal customs process. The containers got put onto trucks, and the trucks drove near the airfield targets. Then, in what I can only describe as a set piece from a James Bond film, the trucks blew their tops to reveal that they were hiding relatively standard drones. The drones then went to the airfields, found their targets, and went boom. Back to Zelensky. What's most interesting, and this can now be stated publicly, is that the office of our operation on Russian territory was located directly next to FSB headquarters in one of the regions. I have no idea whether this is true, and we should be skeptical because there is an obvious incentive to lie here, but that is a great troll nonetheless. In total, 117 drones were used in the operation, with a corresponding number of drone operators involved. 34% of the strategic cruise missile carriers stationed at airbases were hit. Our people operated across several Russian regions, in 3 different time zones. And the people who assisted us were withdrawn from Russian territory before the operation. They are now safe. Again, be cautious with the numbers here. With that being said, Ukraine also suggested that the losses were $7 billion. And if that is even in the ballpark of accuracy, good gracious. We continue to propose a full and unconditional ceasefire, along with all rational and dignified steps that could lead to a lasting and reliable peace. The Ukrainian proposal we presented to the Russians is logical and realistic. Note how he is ending here with a genuflection to Trump's insistence that Ukraine be pro-negotiations. In any case, I want to move on to a more serious discussion, beginning with analyzing just how vulnerable Russia is here. Actually, this is something that we had suspected was the case for a while now. Russia is struggling to construct and operate sufficient air defenses. What Russia does have has either been sent close to Ukraine, or is protecting politically important areas like Moscow and St. Petersburg. Previously, the victim of the shortage has been Russian oil operations, like refineries. But it seems like there was nothing to stop Ukraine from striking bases in far-flung regions of Russia. The payoff here is threefold. 1. This is not a problem that Russia is going to solve overnight. For the foreseeable future, Ukraine's only limitation in exploiting the vulnerability is getting more explosives to the area. Second, this is a problem for Russia more generally. Remember, Ukraine did this with drones. Imagine what NATO would be able to do if Russia started pushing in that direction. Finally, well, this is a NATO problem too. or an every country problem. It costs money to build hangars, so oftentimes these types of planes end up sitting outside. Perhaps we are going to see renewed investment in getting all of this type of equipment under a roof, where cheap drones cannot easily damage them. Come to think of it, the risk of cross-border attacks on the US homeland was a topic that came up during my most recent video over on Lines on Maps Extra, and now it feels even more real. Final side point about Russian vulnerability here. How does the Kremlin expect to stop a repeat of this attack? As far as we can tell, Ukraine smuggled drones in via normal trade. Is Russia going to inspect every single shipping container that enters the country for a false top? If so, can you imagine how expensive that is going to be? Now on to how Russia plans to retaliate. Obviously, something is going to happen here, but I want to narrow our discussion down to the nuclear dimension. And it is fitting because we just discussed Russian nuclear bluffs not too long ago. Russia's nuclear doctrine has 3 conditions under which it could use a nuclear weapon. 1, if an attack on Russia threatens the stability of the regime. 2, a foreign power attacks Russia with weapons of mass destruction. And 3, in the event of a catastrophic battlefield loss. 1 and 2 are obviously not applicable. As for 3, Russia will have no problem continuing the war, so it is a no-go there as well. Now, that kind of doctrine is subject to change. But beyond a hefty amount of embarrassment, this was not a revolutionary change to the military situation. The vector of attack was quite novel, but that is not the type of thing that is going to cause nuclear doctrine to be rewritten overnight. The bigger thing stopping Russia from using nuclear weapons is that China will cut off Russia in response, and that is something that the Kremlin cannot afford. Remember, Russia is the junior partner in that relationship. Anyway, my point here is that you will hear plenty of nuclear threats in the upcoming days. It is best to ignore them and move on with your life. Point 4. It appears that Ukraine did not inform the Trump administration of the plan. You will also hear plenty of discussion about how this is evidence of a deepening rift between the two. And yes, there is a rift. I have shown you this clip of the Oval Office meltdown probably a dozen times by now, though you really only needed to watch it once to understand that the rift existed. Regardless, I would not read much extra into the lack of communication with this specific attack. The fact is that even during the Biden administration, Ukraine had grown weary of consulting with the United States on these topics. Part of it is operational security, and part of it is that Ukraine is an independent country, in charge of its own war. To wit, the United States did not know about the Kursk offensive ahead of time either, and Trump was not a part of the equation back then. So, again, yes, there is a rift. No, you should not read much into what this particular attack says about it. Finally, there are supposed to be ceasefire talks happening in Istanbul, and they may even be going on right now, literally as you are watching this video. The media's attention will likely turn to what Trump thinks about this, and whether Zelensky is serious or not serious about peace as a result. But the media keep Trump front and center regardless, because he is a polarizing figure, and that, in turn, is good for the ratings. In terms of the war, though, the last 3 months have shown that he is unwilling to do anything to influence the outcome, and thus his opinion is mattering less and less as the days go by. Ukraine only needs to be careful to not completely cross Trump. Otherwise, it will be fine. The best I can tell, the war continues for one of 2 reasons. 1, Russia and Ukraine disagree on the expected outcome of the war. Putin thinks that Russia will take the 4 eastern oblasts by the end of the year, and Ukraine disagrees. It is a classic lines on maps problem of private information. Well, this might mitigate that problem. Part of what may have made Ukraine optimistic is that it knew that Russia was about to lose a whole bunch of air assets. Russia did not. And now the Kremlin needs to recalculate its expected outcome in light of that. The second reason is that Russia maintains the initiative. Any ceasefire right now would give Ukraine time to work on fortifications, which would make it difficult for Russia to win in the event that the war restarts after the ceasefire had been implemented. It is a classic lines on maps problem of shifting power. Whether today's attack does anything to change that is unclear. It would depend on how much you think these planes affect Russia's ability to maintain the initiative, which is nebulous. Of course, that does not mean that Ukraine made a mistake by conducting an attack. Fighting a war is about shaping negotiations, which depend on the expected outcome of a war if you continue to fight it. And today, Ukraine shifted that line of expectation ever so slightly to the east. If you want to learn more about the war, you will love these two awesome books I have written on the subject. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.